Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Atlas Info Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and today we are going to be tackling, depending on how you look at it, rather large or rather insignificant topics. It really depends on you and your view of reality. But it so happens that something came to my attention this week, and the discussion around this particular set of circumstances, uh, it, it was revealed to me that it came to my attention because I needed to address the foundations around why so many people have so many misconceptions about this thing we call reality, this universe we live in, and this reality that we experience. And so many of us, willingly or unwittingly, or we have developed a conditioned understanding of, a perception or an understanding that's based on our perception, our experience, that we believe is foundational to the nature of reality itself. And part of the discourse around reality, especially in more recent years, has been this concept of a multiverse, that ours is only one of countless universes that exist in parallel, and that it is a theory that is born of quantum physics and various different perceptions of quantum phenomena, and how the observer effect causes uh, probabilities in the field to collapse into what is then considered to be a certainty, because it is a perceived reality at that point. But before it is perceived, reality exists in this sort of field of quantum probability. But then this poses a real problem for quantum physicists and physicists in general, because different perceptions constitute different points of view, and therefore two different perceptions of the same experience must produce different realities, or they take place in different universes in this quantum multiverse. And it actually gets very it can get very convoluted and very confusing very quickly. So why would I need to explain or dispel the misconceptions around a multiverse? It's a worthwhile question to ask. And in a moment, I'll be sharing with you a video that is the reason why I am asking the question, and the reason why we are going to look at this phenomenon that we call the multiverse. But along with that, there is another phenomenon that likewise has developed its own life on the internet, especially. And this is a phenomenon that people refer to as the Mandela Effect. Now, the Mandela Effect is this phenomenon whereby individuals swear that growing up, like how they remember things growing up, are different than how they exist today, or how they are told today was that how things always were, if that makes any makes any sense. Now, many of these examples, for better or for worse, are things like product logos and things of that nature. And there's the Bernstein Bears versus the Bernstein Bears. And I actually had this pulled up on a web page, a whole bunch of examples. But that particular page went the way of the dodo when, for some bizarre reason, a few moments into the live stream, my microphone died, and it defaulted to the camera microphone. So I had to reboot the entire system and lose all of my preparation for today's live stream, including my whiteboard and everything. I had to do everything from scratch. But by then there was only 3 minutes left to go live. So it took my computer 3 minutes to reboot. So I'm now scrambling to find those web pages and everything else that I had previously set up. But in any case, we're trying to do that now. Okay, maybe this page might be well, we had an excellent page with lots of graphics and stuff, and now I only seem to be able to get text. So it's Murphy's Law of how this stuff works. The Mandela Effect is named after the fact that many people swear that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 80s. And then when he emerged from prison in the 90s, everybody, that was the birth of this effect. So this idea that we remember things differently than as they were. And the Mandela Effect is a concept that was born on the internet, a theory that history was changed, or that at some point we jumped onto a different timeline in the multiverse. And in that different universe, in that other dimension of the multiverse, the events that we remember or how we remember them never occurred. But so many people could swear that they did occur and that they were that way. So things like Looney Tunes. People swear that Looney Tunes was once spelled Toons, as in cartoons. But it was never Looney Tunes, it was Looney Tunes, Tunes. Tunes as in music. Because music was always a big part of Looney Tunes. Most of the cartoons had some sort of musical track underneath them. So there are tons of these. And like another big one is the what's his name? Moneybags, the character from Monopoly, the mascot of Monopoly. And many people remember him as having a monocle, whereas today he has no monocle, and Parker Brothers or whoever it is that makes the game swears by the fact that he never had a monocle. And so this is an example of people who believe that history was changed somehow, or that we've jumped onto a different timeline in the multiverse. So that's how the Mandela Effect plays into all of this. And I can just briefly share a few of these. I had an excellent web page that had side-by-side images of how people remember it and how it actually was. But that web page, for whatever reason, does not want to appear in whatever search that I do. And maybe it's because I used Chrome. So let me see if I can just go back and go into my history. There it is. All right. So 40 Mandela effects that will blow your mind. So for example, you might think that C-3PO was all gold, but apparently he wasn't. He had a silver the part of his leg on his right leg was actually silver. And then there's this is a popular one. Do you remember Jif peanut butter being Jif or Jiffy? Because they will tell you that it was never Jiffy, it was always Jif. But, people swear there was a Jiffy peanut butter back in the day. The writer of this blog post speculates that they're probably combining Jif with Skippy, and that's how the mind remembers Jif and Skippy and puts it together and creates Jiffy. That's a speculation on the part of the person who's writing. But here's Looney Tunes versus Looney Tunes. And the Bernstein Bears versus the Bernstein Bears. It's the spelling, the E-I-N versus A-I-N. There's this issue, whether or not Curious George had a tail. Then there's more recent ones. People swear it was Sex in the City. But according to the producers and everyone involved, it was never Sex in the City. It was Sex and the City. So then there's, it's strange how a lot of these are products and logos and so on. So people swear that Febreze was spelled with 2 E's, but apparently it was never 2 E's. It was just 1 E. I don't know if you guys can see that. Maybe I'll make myself smaller. There's Oscar Mayer versus Oscar Mayer, the 2 different spellings. Skechers versus Skechers. People swear that there was a T in there. Fruit Loops versus Fruit Loops. People swear that it was spelled like this. Oh yes, and the issue around, then there's like, some of these go way back. So for some reason, people distinctly remember this portrait showing the King of England wielding a turkey leg. But so there's the money bags, the Monopoly. Well, the Monopoly mascot, really. He's the character of Monopoly, and they're how he was and how people remember him. They swear that he had a monocle. In fact, some people will swear that they learned what a monocle was by the characters of Mr. Peanut and Moneybags from Monopoly. That as a child, they didn't even know what a monocle was until it was these 2 characters that helped them understand what a monocle was. Then there's Pikachu's tail. Anyway, Kit Kat having a hyphen or not having a hyphen. Like, there's a lot of these. Like, there's one, the Fruit of the Loom, the cornucopia or no cornucopia. Now, some of these, or a lot of these, are, kind of frivolous. They're logos. I mean, they're not very, consequential from any point of view of significance. However, there are enough of them that people have made this Mandela effect a real thing, and it's a real part of their concept of reality, and that history not only can be changed, but that it has been changed, or that we have jumped from one multiverse to another. And so in the jumping from one to another, the memories that you have were of the previous dimension in the multiverse, whereas now you're living in a different multiverse, dealing with a bunch of people who don't have that memory, and will tell you that no, it was never like that. But that's because you jumped from one multiverse to another. That is one of the explanations, or one of the possible explanations, for this so-called Mandela effect. And just to show you how powerful a belief this is, or can be, I want to play for you the following video. Now I'm gonna make myself smaller here, so now hopefully the sound and everything will come through. So this is just a reel from Facebook. So somebody brought this to my attention and asked me to comment on it.
It's possible that we could die at any time and our consciousness just gets transferred to a copycat alternate dimension that's very just slightly different from the one you were just in. And if you've ever had this experience, please watch this. I'm actually thinking that I did die a few times. One time I didn't watch the car in front of me. I had to swerve in the middle of the traffic, going between two cars. I don't remember the rest, but we were fine. And like everything after that was sort of different, like surreal. And this has happened multiple times in my life where I think I probably died. And then the next day, like the vibe is just different. I feel like there's multiverses. I feel like when you die in one dimension, you end up in another in the same body. Like my wife and kids in a past dimension are like mourning the loss of me, but I'm still fucking you. Does that make sense? Theoretically, I think it's possible that we could die at any.
Okay, so it's very short. And just to reiterate, this is a fellow who believes he had an experience where he believes that he died. And when he came around, his universe was different. Everything around him was different. The vibe was different. And so his conclusion was he died and awoke in a parallel universe. And he believes that in the universe he just left, that his wife and his children are mourning him. This is all of this, whether we're talking about the Mandela Effect or we're talking about this fellow's experience and swearing that the multiverse is real and that we can jump from one universe to the other. This is an example of relying on the binary duality and mechanicity of our rational mind to make sense of a reality that is beyond its comprehension. Allow me to repeat that, perhaps in slightly different language. This whole talk of multiverses and Mandela effects is a byproduct, a symptom of relying on the binary duality of mechanical mind to try to comprehend a phenomenon which is beyond its capacity to understand. The nature of reality, the nature of the universe, is that it is an amalgamation. It is a profound multiplicity. The reason why quantum physicists and so many others resonate so strongly with the concept or the theory of a multiverse, it's because deep down intuitively it resonates with the fact that there is an infinite number of individuated essences experiencing a co-created reality simultaneously. And to the degree that those individuated essences exist on a broad spectrum, a stratum of different levels of being, meaning different levels of awakened consciousness, meaning different levels of subjectivity, that those essences experiencing, particularly in this level of that reality, three-dimensional reality, many monads are trapped. The consciousness of those monads is trapped within the subjective experience of a physical being in this physical reality. So the perception of those monads experiencing subjective reality from a subjective point of view limits their perception and their experience to that subjective experience. What that means functionally, practically, from the standpoint of a shared consciousness, the singular multiplicity, the oneness, the union of all those individuated essences, of all those individuated experiences, is that the amalgamation of all that experience includes different perceptions of the universe, which are highly subjective and are highly conditioned by the circumstances of the subjectivity in which they're being experienced. So, from our point of view, for example, the universe is solid. It is a materium. That's from our point of view. That's why we have this monstrosity that we call materialist science, that believes that physicality is the primary foundation of reality. Now, the quantum physicists come along and mess that all up to various different degrees, but even they cannot escape the mental conditioning of being trapped here in the physical universe and be limited by the conditioning of physical reality, material reality. And even more so, limited by the binary duality of the rational mind itself. So it's very limited in how it can think about these things. And because there is a separation, the subjective self, in that state of subjectivity, is separated from the true self, from the essence, from the monad, which has the ability to perceive objectively. That separation and the perception of separation between myself and the other, and between myself and all phenomena, right? I am not the table. I am not the tree. I am not you. I am not this camera that I'm talking into, right? Look around you. You cannot deny that from the subjective point of view, your experience is telling you that you are separate from all the people and all the things around you. That separation is the foundation for the binary duality on which the rational mind operates. I and other, right? I and not I. And on that basis, coupled with the subjective experience, that my experience versus your experience, let's say you are colorblind. You see the world very differently than I do. Or if you are physically blind, you can't actually see, Your perception of the world now, it depends on touch, on smell, on sound, right? Your other senses will be heightened, and your perception of reality is going to be bound within the subjective state of being blind, or the way a dragonfly sees the universe, right? Or any other insect with its multifaceted, segmented eyes, or that different creatures that see in different spectrums of light, their experience of the universe is very different. Or an amoeba or a bacteria, its experience is very different. Or a tree or a rock, its experience is very different than that of a human being. So, and the amoeba is not the rock, and the rock is not the tree, and the tree is not the dragonfly, and the dragonfly is not the human being. So not only are all the experiences subjective, but they're also unique and separate. So you have actually, in terms of perception, in terms of consciousness, you have different virtual universes within the consciousness of those separate beings. My idea of the universe, right? My truth is different from your truth. But because it's my truth and your truth, well, my truth is no less valid than your truth, right? This is how we run into today all the problems with the moral relativism, and how everybody's opinion matters and everybody's opinion is on the same level, and everybody has their own my truth. Therefore, even within our own society, from a virtual intellectual point of view, this is what the postmodernists were on about. There is no such thing as objective reality because everything is filtered through subjective perception. Therefore, there is, on this planet alone, how many of us are there? So even amongst the human beings alone, there's at least 8 billion different planets. There has to be at least 8 billion different worlds, because there's 8 billion different human beings all perceiving this world from a different subjective, separated point of view. So even from that perspective, there are 8 billion multiverses of this planet, just here and now in this moment. But now add all the billions of people who came before throughout history, and all the billions of people who have yet to live, and now the whole concept of the multiverse just balloons out of control. And that all of that probability and stuff is what the quantum physicists and their fancy formulas are desperately trying to wrap their heads around. And you can see how it all does get very much out of control very quickly. It just balloons logarithmically, exponentially. So our first comment comes from Oh Sweet Mercy, which is a great username, by the way. And they say, I had to join late. Will a replay be available? Yes. Yes, you'll be able to go back and watch the first half an hour. The entire thing, in fact, will be, as soon as we're finished, it's going to be online in both Facebook and YouTube. So, and by the way, it's nice to have you here, Oh Sweet Mercy, because I would have remembered this username had you been here before, or had you at least commented before. So welcome. So what gives then? What gives with this multiverse crap? Because clearly, even as I've been speaking to you, I seem to have been making the case that everybody's experience is individuated, and that we are all individuated essences or individuated consciousness that are each having our own subjective experience of reality, and the result of that in our own mental worlds is a subjective perception of reality. And oh yes, so Sweet Mercy says, "Thank you. Yes, first time. Well, welcome. We are happy to have you here. Hopefully, it won't be your last time either, but that depends largely on how well the rest of this talk goes, doesn't it?" So let's continue on. You can conceive of just how futile such a reality would be. Imagine yourself, and if you are here, this is not a stretch. If you are here, it is because there is something within you, deep inside, that is longing for the truth, insight, clarity, to cut through all the noise and all the nonsense and all the subjectivity and get to the real stuff, how it is. Tell me how it is. Show me how it is. Or show me the way so that I can go and experience what it is and how it is for myself. If you are here, that's why you are here. You are seeking self-evident experiential knowledge, not theory, not conjecture, not belief, and not opinion. You want to know, and you want to know not that you think you know, but that you know, that you've been shown, that you have been given access to. Not something that you concocted or contrived in your head as a reasonable human-created facsimile, a shadowy reflection or a shadowy interpretation of, or worse, projection of. No, if you're here, it's because you long for that sense of certainty, that sense of peace and of fulfillment, the self-actualization of being one with, of having connected to that which is. It is what it is. I am that I am. Eheye asher eheye. The holy name of God. I am that I am. It is what it is. Well, you can imagine then the futility, the frustration, the lack of agency that comes with being thrown into a postmodernist soup where everybody has a my truth and how everybody's perception of reality is as good as anybody else's in terms of explaining how things are. And in the strata of objectivity and subjectivity, the deeper you go into psychological hell, the more rules there are. So, for example, on this level of reality, this three-dimensional reality, we have 48 laws, including the law of gravity. Well, when you project into the astral plane, there's, I believe, if I'm getting this right, 36 laws or 24 laws. In any case, there's no gravity. There's no gravity in the astral plane because there's no physicality. There's no physics. There's no laws of physics. If there's no physics, there's no gravity, right? Because gravity only applies to those phenomena that have mass. And the laws of physics require mass. But in the astral plane, there's no mass. Well, no mass, no laws of physics, no gravity. So, in other words, laws are that which we are subjected to at any given level, in any given dimension. And the higher you go, the fewer laws there are. the greater the freedom. The less subjectivity, the greater objectivity. Until finally you get to the zero dimension, the absolute, where there are zero laws. There are no laws. There's absolute free will. And it is from the zero dimension that all creation takes place. That's the realm of the cosmo-creators. That's the realm of from which God can create. And there's unlimited potential, unlimited possibility. And this is, of course, what in the New Age people talk about all the time in terms of manifesting your desires and unlimited abundance and all this nonsense. This is how they're able to rope people into that particular belief system, because they are tapping into that resonant truth in the same way that the proponents of the multiverse tap into the resonant truth of the world of absolute, the world of archetypes, which is where the Christ consciousness exists, which are so few laws and the perfect multiple unity. It is the multiplicity of all essences throughout the universe. So in other words, all those different experiences exist simultaneously as one experience. So it is a limitless, infinite number of perceptions of a single universe. It doesn't mean that the universe splits off into different, right? The universe doesn't make an infinite number of copies of itself to accommodate your particular decision, your particular choice. No, it doesn't need to do that. Why? When you are already part of the whole. There is only one universe, and it is experiencing itself through this infinite number of individuated experiences with an infinite strata of objectivity and subjectivity. And the deeper you go into psychological hell, the more laws get applied, the more subjective it becomes, the heavier experience becomes. The subjective experience becomes all the heavier because you are subject to more and more and more laws. And the postmodernist view of my truth and everybody's truth is equal, well, now that's adding whole different layers of subjectivity to your life and to your attempt to know reality, that now you have to navigate the concept that there is no objective reality. All there is an infinite number of subjective truths. Where does that leave you and that inner longing that you feel to know the one objective truth? The moral relativism of my truth leads to a kind of nihilism and a kind of self-loathing and a kind of purposelessness, pointlessness. Well, that's nihilism. To reality, to experience itself. And it is a very, very lonely place indeed. Even though the New Agers will find a way to twist that into a kind of community, into kind of communal experience of everybody having their own individuated my truth. And that somehow bands them all together as one, because they're all equal in their individuated subjective realities. But that's kind of, and born out of that is this kind of hive mind, like a termite mound or an ant colony. That I describe in my book, one of the tricks of mechanical nature to get the pseudo spiritual people, the ones who are drawn to the spiritual path, but fall into these traps that have been set by the Black Lodge to cause them to spiral uncontrollably down into a pseudo spiritual worship of mechanical nature, and into a mystic pride that, unbeknownst to them, they believe that they're awakening, but in fact, they're awakening negatively. They're awakening as demons. And that they are pledging themselves to mechanical nature and the hive mind that they call Gaia, or, nature worship, and so on and so forth. And the morphogenetic field, and there are all sorts of different names that they come up with, and theories and attitudes and rationalizations and fantasies. And many of these fantasies are supported by their use of psychedelic drugs. And the reason why they become so enamored and so hypnotized by these traps, these fantasies, especially on psychedelics, is because they are being taken into the lunar astral plane. They are being taken into hell, where they are subjected to more laws, where mechanical nature has a greater ability to impose upon the consciousness. Remember, that's what subjectivity means: to subject someone to something, to subjectify, right? Like a ruler, a king or a queen has their subjects. They are subject to their will. So the subjective perceptions, meaning that there is something overriding our ability to see clearly. And this is present in the language of esotericism and spirituality, because we have the word clairvoyance. Clairvoyance, which is a French Latin term meaning clear vision. Vision that is able to penetrate the blinders, the subjective conditioning of the mind, of the consciousness, that puts the consciousness to sleep, that makes the consciousness believe I am my body, and I am my thoughts, and I am my emotions. And I am separate from this camera, and I am separate from the people watching, and I am separate from the desk and the table and the shelves and all the rest of it, right? The separation. But you see, all of all of these experiences, including the fellow in the video that we played, the one that believes that he died and woke up in a different dimension. It's all based around being trapped in the subjective mind itself. And the mind tells stories. I mean, all of reality, all of existence is narratives and stories, and the mind participates in that. There is another phenomenon which I'm sure you have experienced, where the mind fills in the blanks. You can be reading. Have you ever tried proofreading your own work? You've typed a letter, or you've typed an essay, or you've written a book, whatever. And you're going and you're rereading your own work. and you can reread it 3 or 4 times, and it's fine. There's no mistakes in it, that you've read it over and over again. And then you go ahead and print it out, right? And the next day you go to bed, right? And the next day you wake up and you're getting ready to go hand it in at school or university or to your boss or whatever, and you figure, I'll just look at it once more. And then it's been 12 hours or whatever since you looked at it last, and all of a sudden, and now you're reading it on paper, not on the screen, and all of a sudden, boom, oh my God, there's a missing comma here, and there's a missing word there, and this is misspelled, and these 2 words are backwards, and right? And you've had that experience. Why? How? It's because when you were looking at it on the screen, and it was so fresh in your mind that you had written it, and every time you were trying to proofread it, your mind was skipping over the errors and actually fixing the errors within itself, within your own perception. It was preventing you from seeing the errors as your mind was self-correcting your own perception, filling in blanks, putting in commas, taking commas out where they didn't belong, and it was doing all the editing in your own mind, in your own perception, such that you were convinced that it was fine. But your mind was doing that work, and it was getting in the way of you seeing what was actually there. And this happens all the time, and this is such a common and universal experience, where we come across things, we could be reading magazines and whatever, and there are errors in it, and we just skip right over them because our mind is making the corrections, or our mind is filling in the blanks. And I was looking for a website that would actually show us some examples of these. But again, because I had to reboot the system and everything else, those are all gone. So, you can go and do that research for yourself if you want to see the types of, what would you call them? They're the tricks that the mind plays on us. And there are many, like optical illusions, for example, are an example of this. Or how there are artists who are able to create chalk art on the sidewalk that is so convincingly realistic in the way that they draw the 3-dimensionality, that they can draw holes in the sidewalk, and if you're walking along, you'll walk around their drawing because it's so realistic and it's just so convincing. Your mind won't let you step on it because your mind is telling you that you're going to fall into that hole in the sidewalk. And a lot of these hyper realistic 3-dimensional type artwork is all playing on that. It's all taking advantage of our mind's conditioning, the subjective conditioning of our consciousness in this 3-dimensional reality, that this is the nature of reality. And so if an illusion is convincing enough that the mind will be convinced of something that isn't there, or that it's looking at a reality which is an illusion, the mind can't tell the difference. It's the same for dreams, and it's the same for hallucinogens. But the hallucinogens are even more powerful than dreams because they give users the experience that they're lucid, but it's a kind of false lucidity. It's more subjective. But in that more subjectivity, the hyper realism of those experiences can make them believe that they are traveling the cosmos and they're speaking with ascended masters or angels or archangels or whatever their particular conditioned experience and their desires from a spiritual point of view, the hallucinogen will either give them that or give them the complete opposite of that in order to scare them into, so-called bad trips. But either way, they're still in hell, right? Either way, because no psychedelic can take you into the supernal worlds. You cannot have an objective experience by being put under a subjective experience. A subjective experience cannot produce an objective experience. That's like you trying to tell me you can jump higher on the high jump the more lead weights I strap to your body. Sure, if you live your entire life with lead weights strapped to your body, and then you take those weights off, right? The amount of musculature you will have developed with the weights means you're going to be able to jump really high. But you still have to take the weight off. You can't do it simultaneously, and you're not going to jump there because of the weight. You're going to jump there because the weight was taken off. This is why it's a process of awakening and self-realization is a process of ego elimination. And the higher potential we have to rise is proportional to the amount of ego, the demon here that we're living with, that we have to overcome. Using that analogy of the weight, because it's that demon that helps us develop the muscles to be able to fulfill our potential. But so anyway, we have a bunch of comments that we better get to before we get too far behind. Yang Sheng says, "Hi, Attlas. Nice to see you again. Nice teaching. Thank you, Yang Sheng. Nice to have you here." Gaia the Sage says, Gaia the Sage, also a new name that I don't recognize, so welcome. It's nice to have you here. Gaia the Sage says, "I was agreeing with you until you reached hallucinogens. Psychonautics isn't a trap. Well, maybe if you're doing chaos magic, but otherwise, this sounds like more leftover Judeo-Christian bias. Born out of dualistic thought. It's ironic, given the only reason I could agree with you earlier points because of my previous work with psychedelics. I have had lucid dreams more engaging than the strongest hallucinations. People need to stop spreading the myth that psychedelics are stronger than dreams. They are both simply different states of consciousness. And subjective versus objective, what a huge dualistic trap." Well, thanks for your opinion, Gaia the Sage, and good luck with your continued use of psychedelics. All I can say is psychedelics have their role, right? They have their role to play in many people's lives. In the same way that a on-ramp has a role to play for those who cannot find their way onto the highway, right? So the on-ramp can get you onto the highway. But once you're on the highway, what need of you do you have of the ramp anymore? Many famous people who are big proponents of psychedelic use, who have been using psychedelics for decades, they are no further ahead than they were decades ago when they began using them. It's the ongoing psychedelic use that's the issue here. And another way to understand this is that even poison taken in trace amounts can be a medicine. So for example, honeybee stings and snake venom can be used in certain medical applications in very, very tiny, minute amounts. But we know that even the most beneficial of medicines, the most beneficial of substances, taken too much, too often, can become poisonous. You can hyperventilate. You can drink too much water. You can die from overhydrating yourself. You can die from over-oxygenating yourself. These are absolute objective facts. They are undeniable and indisputable. So to deny that the same universal truth doesn't apply to psychedelics, somehow, magically, they are the only substances in the universe that buck the trend that all other substances have to adhere to that law, the law of balance, the law of the middle way, the razor's edge, that somehow psychedelics alone don't fall into that category, is the utmost and subjective, illusory hypnosis and ignorance. And there is such a thing as subjective and objective truth. There is the truth, and there is there's that which is not truth. And you can try to turn this with your cleverness all you want against us, right? As to say, well, that I'm the one who's trapped in duality. You can do that all you want, but you have not been here long enough to be able to know how ignorant a statement this is. So that's just, that's, you're entitled to voice your opinion, and I'm entitled to give you a response as to why your opinion is unfortunately incorrect. Gaia the Sage responds and says, people don't often mix philosophy and psychonautics. That's a huge part of the problem. I completely agree with moderation, though, using medical wisdom. Well, there you go. All right, where were we? Yes. So this notion of the multiverse, then, again, it's the problem arises when we rely on a tool which is insufficient to comprehend the nature of reality, right? Like Gaia here is attempting to point out, there is also, transgective truth, transcendental truth. I don't know. That's a new word to me, so you'll have to explain that one. There's the truth, and then there's illusion. There's hypnosis and illusion, right? That's the reality. And the reality is that all of that, the subjective, false realities that people perceive, those exist in the lower astral plane. Those exist in psychological hell. And that the reason why that exists is because no one and no thing can know itself and what it's capable of and what its true nature is without its opposite, without an adversary. So if you are a high jumper, you do not know how high you can jump until you have a bar to jump over, or an obstacle to traverse. You simply don't know. And the nature of that particular test, jumping heights, is an objective measure of a subjective reality. But the fact that you had to struggle and work and train to be able to jump higher than what you used to be able to jump, that's undeniable. And you could call that your truth if you want, but it is the truth, as you are not separate from the one singular consciousness that is the source of the infinite number of individuated essences of that consciousness. So there is no game, there is no test, there is no challenge that exists without an obstacle, without a test, without something to challenge, to oppose. Without that opposition, there's no game, there's no test, there's no challenge. And without a game, a test, or a challenge, there's nothing to know. You don't know what you're capable of. So the obstacles are there to help us, to give us something to overcome. And in the overcoming of the obstacle, that's how we come to know ourselves. And insofar as these obstacles, from a psychological, spiritual point of view, these obstacles are within us, that which we are not, but that which fit within us, which we are not, but it is constantly pretending to be us and constantly trying to hypnotize us and ensnare us and entrap us in what? In its subjectivity. It is trying to make us subject to its whims, which are wholly mechanical and wholly deterministic, in violation of the one great law, even above the law of karma, which is cause and effect. The one law, even above that, is the law of free will. Really, when it all comes down to it, it comes down to the battle between the forces of free will and the forces of determinism. That is the forces of consciousness, the forces of love, the forces of selflessness, and the forces of selfishness, which is mechanicity, which is the ultimate in determinism. Because that is what subjectivity is. And objectivity is to know oneself and freely, to know oneself free of all subjectivity. And that is to know oneself as the essence of selflessness, no self. Whereas all selfishness is just another form of mechanicity, another form of subjectivity that is trying to subject free will to determinism. So this is like a cog in a machine, has no choice. And there are many, many, many people in this day and age who argue for, who are arguing the case that free will doesn't exist, that free will is an illusion. And they're able to argue that precisely because they are wholly in the grips of subjective reality, and they are wholly in the grips of their mechanical, rational ego mind. So of course, the forces of mechanicity are going to argue that free will is an illusion, and that all there is mechanistic determinism, that what you think is free will is an illusion. And some of these philosophers and scientists and sociologists and psychologists are online, and they have, quite a number of followers and people who read their books and listen to their lectures and everything else. So they've got quite a number of followers who buy into their teachings, who are convinced that yeah, that's right, there is no free will, everything's determined, everything's determinism. Well, that's great for the individual, because now I don't have any responsibility. I'm not responsible for myself. I'm not responsible for my actions. Everything is determined. Everything is deterministic. There is no free will. I had no choice in the matter. I was being acted upon, and if I was being acted upon, I had no choice in the matter. I'm not responsible for my actions. Is this not actually a defense in courtrooms these days? They call it the plea of insanity, do they not? Your Honor, my client was not lucid when he committed these acts. So, but in that same courtroom, right, you cannot say that the defendant was possessed by a demon. You cannot actually go the whole 9 yards and say the truth. No, there's this fuzzy gray area of called the plea of insanity. So an awful lot of those individuals never get the help that they really need. They were overcome, they were overwrought, they were possessed. And we have these, but see, the language doesn't lie. Language doesn't lie. We don't have generations of people saying, oh my goodness, what possessed me to do that? We don't have generations of people saying that, because it's meaningless, because there's no objective reality to the statement, what possessed me to do that? All of you who have been around here for a while and know me, and some of you have even witnessed me have a seizure, you know that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to being possessed and being taken over and performing actions that are beyond my volition. So you know that I'm not speaking of hypothetics or theoretical or and that the whole reason why I took on the burden that I did in this lifetime is to be able to speak with authority on these matters, not because I read it in a book. To experience hell, psychological hell, in ways that, frankly, the majority of people on this planet will never have to experience. But I've experienced them in order to be able to speak knowledgeably, and also to be able to relate and have empathy and compassion for everybody suffering with every form of minor possession that they undergo, including depression, anxiety, phobias, outbursts of anger, bipolar disorder, countless forms of symptoms on the autism spectrum, everything from ADD and ADHD to autism to Asperger's. And all of that is contained within this great unifying multiplicity of one universe, one consciousness that has been divided into all of these individuated essences. And all of these individuated experiences all come together and are actually calculated under the great law of karma, of cause and effect, because all of these actions and reactions actually have rippling effects through that entire omniverse, we could call it, right? All of these individuated experiences, all of these individuated lifetimes. But they're all individuated essences of the whole consciousness that unites and binds us all together as one. But it's very much like you considering your body, yourself, here now, and you say, well, yeah, I'm one human being, right? Yeah, okay. How many cells? How many cells in you right now? Have you counted? Can you even count them? And then let's not forget all of the bacteria beginning in your gut and elsewhere in your body that have a symbiotic relationship with you, without which you would die. Right? That's why probiotics are so important, and that's why eating fermented foods is so important, because you won't be able to, you can't digest fiber without them. You can't extract from fiber without those that ecosystem within your digestive system. And then consider the fact that many of those cells, they're not just individuated cells. They're not just doing their own thing. No, they're part of a collective that performs a very specific function within your body, and not just your physical body, but also your etheric body and your emotional body and your mental body. These are called organs. Right? Have you paid attention to your organs lately? Do you know your kidneys? Do you know your liver? Do you know your heart? Do you know your lungs? Do you know what function they perform for you, without which you would die? You could not be, you could not exist, at least not here and now in this form that you are currently partaking in. What is reality like to a kidney cell, I wonder? And then go one step down. Have you ever seen any radio microscopy of the interior functioning and dynamics of a single cell? It is absolutely mind-blowing. It is phenomenal. It is like this little factory going on there with like little mechanized groups of molecules pulling along giant lysosomes filled with essential substances, and they're being pulled along this lattice network throughout the cell, and then you have the mitochondria and everything. It is miraculous, and there is absolutely no scientific explanation for how these things can be taking place. Science does not know. It has absolutely no mechanism, no explanation for how a bunch of single molecules can come together to form these little robotic walker machines inside the cell that know which lysosomes to take across which lattice work, right? From which organelle to what organelle. And biology has no clue how any of this works. They can look at it through a radio electron microscope and they're completely dumbfounded. There's like these molecules like all seem to be just coming together and self-organizing and self-propelling themselves and doing all of this. Right? So materialist science is at a complete loss. And that's a whole little world inside the cell. It's a little world. And if you look at it from the point of view of those molecules or those little mechanized little guys doing their work inside the cell, it's like what must the universe appear like to them? So it is only with awakened consciousness that we can penetrate into and know and comprehend all of this taking place in a single field of experience, in a single field of consciousness. And we can only know that by direct experience of it. We have to become it. We have to unite with it. And that's why the word union, to bind together as one, is the Latin re, legare, and the Sanskrit yug, which are the root words of religion and yoga, respectively. That's where those words come from. Means to unite with, to know directly, to know intimately, by joining with, becoming two as one, to overcome the dualism that we talked about earlier. Yang Sheng says, how do you think about those how do you think about those hypnotists? Do you think their job is effective to cure some of your mental problems? So the thing about hypnosis is how does one... I've often said you can't rob Peter to pay Paul. Hypnosis, and there are many forms of hypnosis, and there are many forms of therapies that are effectively different forms of hypnosis, different degrees of hypnosis, or have similar effects. But what you're doing really is rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. Okay, so if you imagine yourself on the Titanic and you go up on the deck and all the chairs are in a big messy pile in the middle and nobody can get around and nobody can suntan and it's a catastrophe, right? That's how many people dealing with their childhood traumas or all this other stuff that, that they think that they're dealing with. They believe that if only they can untangle that mess, that web of deck chairs, and they can get everything back in nice, neat rows again, and they can rearrange their mind and get it now all nicely arranged again, that all their problems will be over. All their problems will be solved. But nobody ever stops to ask, well, what caused the deck chairs to end up that way? And unfortunately, the clever materialist ego minds and the rational minds, they come up with, oh, well, it's childhood trauma. That's childhood trauma. That's what caused it. That's what made the mess in the mind. So all we have to do is untangle and undo the childhood trauma, and you'll be fine. And you'll be fine. But they neglect the truth, which is you do not suffer circumstances that result in you having a so-called trauma by accident. The circumstances that so-called caused the trauma were only there to trigger what was already inside of you. Or if it was between the ages of 0 and 7, it was a sufficient enough rattling set of circumstances that allowed one of your egos to reincorporate into yourself. But egos, demons, that karma that you were inheriting from a previous lifetime. In other words, an ego or a demon that had to reincorporate because it's karma that you have to deal with. You haven't overcome yet. You have to face it. But some of these demons are substantial and powerful, and they're not so easy to reincorporate into your being. And so, in order to create a wide enough window of opportunity for that demon to reincorporate into you for this lifetime, so you could face it in this lifetime, a suitable set of circumstances need to present themselves that rattle you to your core. And it's either one of those two scenarios. Either that demon was already incorporated in your sleep, or that's why children see monsters under the bed and are afraid of monsters in the closet, because very often demons reincorporate while children are sleeping. But then they wake up, or they have a lucid dream experience, and they're terrified of the monsters under the bed or the monsters in the closet. What they're experiencing there are demons reincorporating into them. That happens in the first 7 years of life while the personality is being developed. So any trauma that happens during that period of time is most likely either there to assist a demon in reincorporating, or is there to bring an already incorporated demon to the surface. Because the thing about our demons, our shadow, whatever you want to call it, is that it's in the subconscious mind, and we do not have access to it there. It's like you trying to be a spear fisherman, right? Trying to hunt great white sharks that are 2,000 feet below the surface. You're not going to get very far. What do you need to do? You need to chum the water. You need to draw the sharks to the surface. Then you have a chance of spearing the shark. Remember Jaws, okay? Right? Now, they called it a great white shark, but really it's, either as a great white shark or closer to a megalodon. And if you know anything about those creatures, they survive for hundreds of millions of years precisely because they are able to go to depths that no human could ever go, even with a deep sea freaking submarine. But they respond to electromagnetic fields, and they respond to blood in the water. And when there's blood in the water, there's prana in the water. There's energy, vitality. And these primal predators, they are attracted by that. They are attracted to that. And so too our egos. We can draw them up from the subconscious mind, but only if the circumstances present themselves that are a similar vibration. So, unfortunately, if we have a very negatively vibrating demon deep in our subconscious mind, in order to draw it to the surface level disturbance has to vibrate at a frequency that will attract that demon, that predator, from its safety, from its cave deep in hell up to the surface. And when it does so, it comes to feed. It comes to feed on us. It comes to take advantage of that set of circumstances. And when it does so, it imprints on our mind and in our heart and in our physical body. This is what psychologists call trauma. And many people live with the so-called pain of that trauma their entire life. And then they go to hypnotists and psychologists and psychiatrists and, to medicate themselves or whatever, to try to alleviate the pain and overcome the pain of that trauma. But really, all they're doing is they're just fixing the deck chairs, right? They're not actually getting at the shark. They're not actually getting at what caused what was the cause of all of those deck chairs being put into that configuration in the first place? What was the cause of the mess? Cleaning up the mess is going to make you feel better. But if you don't get at the cause of the mess, guess what? It's just something else is going to come along that's going to mess up all the deck chairs again. Because you need to get at the source of the problem. And that's unfortunately what hypnosis cannot do. And cognitive behavioral therapy cannot do. And what all of the self-help gurus cannot do. Because they're all there to build up the personality and build up the ego and create self-esteem and positivity, and I can do this and I can do anything and I can overcome anything, and I. Building up the subject instead of stripping away the subject, comprehending the source of subjectivity, the sources of the subjectivity, and liberating the objective self, the consciousness, from the sources of subjectivity. This is psychoanalysis, right? Jung came closest in psychology when he talked about the integration of the shadow and doing the shadow work and looking at all the parts of ourselves that we were afraid to look at, or that was unpleasant for us to look at. And he was correct when he stated that within our shadow, within that darkness of the subconscious mind, are many of our strengths. But the way in which he has been interpreted has been misunderstood and has been misappropriated and misapplied in many cases. You have people, for example, like Jordan Peterson, who makes the erroneous statements of, you have to do your shadow work, you have to understand your shadow, you have to make friends with your shadow and integrate your shadow, because you have to know that you have the potential to be terrible. You have to know you have the potential to be, you have to be vicious, right? And you have to be like, as if what you're doing is reclaiming these egos of anger, of violence, of whatever, and then you have to learn how to use those in a productive way, which is not it at all. Integration of the shadow, I've described it as going down into the cellar and bringing up the 25-year-old or 50-year-old bottle of Dom Perignon champagne. Now, how can you, practically speaking, integrate that bottle of champagne? Are you going to swallow the whole bottle? No. You open it, you pop the cork, you pour out the champagne, and then what do? You discard the bottle, you recycle it, you throw it away. The value of a bottle of champagne is not the bottle, it's not the label, it's what is inside. It's what that bottle was containing under pressure. And if you comprehend the mechanical nature within you, you have a champagne winery, a distillery within you. And all of your experiences, all the fruits of your labors are the grapes on the vine. And within you, there's this great machine, this distillery that wants to take all that fruit for itself and mash it up and ferment it and bottle it under pressure and stick it away deep, deep within your cellars. Because what do wine connoisseurs value? What do wine collectors value, right? They value the bottles, the dusty bottles in their cellar, and the label and the vintage. That's what they value. They like being able to come out and show the bottle and then take it back downstairs and put it back in the cellar. Because mechanical nature hoards that which is valuable. It bottles it up and it keeps it under pressure, and it wants to keep adding to its collection more and more and more and more and more. So the integration of the shadow is not bringing the bottles up and saying, oh, okay, how can I use this to hit people over the head with? No, it's how can I come and liberate the vintage, the champagne from the bottles, and how can I share it with others? And make it a celebration, and make it a feast, make it a gift, a marriage, a Christmas, an Easter, a Thanksgiving, every day, and share the precious, valuable, golden effervescence that is bottled up in the cellars of my own psychological hell. This is integration of the shadow. The bottles are discarded. The egos are discarded. You don't need them anymore. What for? You only need the consciousness that's bottled up inside of them. And the wisdom and the knowledge and the experience that you gain from drinking that champagne and finally knowing what that vintage really is. Whereas before, all you had was the dusty bottle and the label and what other people had to say about it. So, hypnosis, in this particular case, it's in this particular example, if you want to run with this analogy, it's like rearranging the bottles. You know, it's like you go down and you say, oh, my everything's in disarray, so I'm going to rearrange all the bottles in the racks, or I'm going to turn all the bottles, right? Because you have to do that when you collect wine. You have to turn the bottles so the corks don't dry out, and so on and so forth. Azazel says, I'm going to break the silence as well by saying hello. Hello, Azazel. It's nice to have you here. Yang Sheng says, do you believe those channelers? They claim to channel high beings. What do you think about these phenomena? Channeling, also known as spiritism, is a spiritual crime. Possession, even a willing possession, is a crime, and members of the White Lodge, supernal beings, do not possess anyone. It's a crime. It's a violation of free will. Even if the person wants to be possessed, an angel, a master, an ascended master will not do it. A demon will, and demons very often appear to people on the astral plane as resplendent beings of light. So if somebody is claiming to be channeling some other entity, if they're really channeling an entity, then they're channeling a being of darkness, even if that being is pretending to be a being of light, which is most likely what they're doing. And New Age bookstores are filled with books that were written by people who were so-called channeling the contents of the book. But I want you to consider the following. If you have any doubts about what I'm saying, consider the following. Which do you think is more characteristic of a master of the White Lodge, a true spiritual being who could only ascend to that level through the path of the Bodhisattva, a path of suffering and sacrifice for humanity? In other words, beings that are one with the Christ, that are one with the great purest essence of selflessness in action. Which do you think is more in keeping with that description? That they choose somebody to be a mouthpiece, a megaphone, or like to fax down instructions for humanity? Or that being of light, that being of selflessness, will come and reincarnate as a flesh and blood human being and live a lifetime of suffering and sacrifice for humanity in order to deliver his message, his teaching, his message, his teaching directly, personally, one-to-one and one-to-many. Which do you think is more characteristic of a selfless being? And when you understand that channeling is a possession, that another entity is possessing the channeler, and I know a little bit about possession, what do you think is more characteristic, or what does that describe when one entity wants to possess another entity? And to what end? Because if you do a kind of survey of all this so-called channeled material, you will find a great many discrepancies between all this channeled material. It's not one message. It's all kinds of different, because demons can't help themselves. They're mechanical AI. They don't know any better, and they can't help themselves. They can't speak the truth. They can only use disinformation and misinformation and 90% truth in order to sow chaos, misinformation, and disinformation. So that's the answer. That's not what I believe about channelers. That's the fact. That's a fact. That's just what is. That's what they are. And there are people who have made a career out of channeling. Now, there may be some, but very few among them, who are just speaking from their higher self. And they don't know any better. And they put themselves into a trance, and their higher self speaks through them, and they call it channeling. However, I leave this open as a possibility. And yet, I find it highly dubious and unlikely that their innermost being would allow them to continue referring to themselves that way, or that their innermost being would refer to the activity in that way, because it's a spiritual crime. So no matter how you slice it, there's something very fishy about anybody who claims to be channeling. So, for example, Attila, the mortal here, I am not channeling Attlas. That's not how it works. I am not in a trance. I'm not being possessed. I have free will always to serve or not to serve, to be or not to be. But in channeling, that's not the case. In channeling, the person loses volition. Something else takes them over, and that's a violation. That's a violation that the Masters of the White Lodge will not do. So, we began today's talk about multiverses and the Mandela Effect. And one of the things that we haven't gotten around to is the fact that our perceived experience of reality depends on ourself, on where we are, what level of being that we are at. So the fellow who was describing dying and believing that he awoke in a multiverse, in a different dimension of the multiverse, and his justification for believing this was everything had changed. Everything had a different vibe. Everything had a different feel about it, right? He discounts the reality that we can only perceive according to our level of being. So if he underwent a psychological death, which really felt like a death, a part of him died, an aspect of him, an ego, something died, and what was released was more consciousness, then of course his entire world is going to change. Why? Because his perception of reality is never going to be the same. If he was struggling with some ego, some demon, and through some set of circumstances or course of events, that demon is obliterated and the consciousness is liberated, then he now has more free consciousness to work with, and he has one less demon to face. Well, now he's going to feel different, and of course his whole life is going to seem different. But that doesn't necessitate him having to have died physically and moved to a different dimension, a different multiverse. No. It's your perception of reality is changed, so your reality changes. Because let's face it, this three-dimensional reality that we all believe is so real, it's an illusion. It doesn't exist. There's no physicality anywhere in the universe. Anywhere. It's a projection of consciousness. It's a filtered projection. It's a subjective projection. Change the filter. It's like a film in a film projector, right? You change the film, you change what's projected on the screen. It's just self-evident. So if in the course of your working on yourself, and you're doing the psychological work, and you're undergoing psychological death, and one of your egos dies, well, then that is going to be reflected on what's being projected on the screen, because that film, let's say that character in the movie, no longer exists. Well, the nature of the whole movie changes. That character is no longer going to be there. So maybe any relationships that character had with other characters, or plot lines that character was undertaking, well, all that's going to be gone. And you, watching the movie, are going to say, hey, I'm watching a whole different movie now. Or I've undergone the Mandela Effect, and somebody went back in time and changed this movie, because I swear there used to be a character on it on the screen who looked that way. So that's just using that as an example. But this is how consciousness and perception blends into this thing that we call reality, which is just a projection of that consciousness. And of course, there is no past, there is no future, there is only the eternal now. All of the past and all of the future exists now. So in the same way that the so-called multiverse and this infinite number of experiences, objective and subjective, all coalesce into the one great multiplicity that we call Christ consciousness. So with that in mind, of course the past can change, history can change, because there is no history, there's only the eternal now. So within that oneness, there's tremendous opportunity for individuation and for experiences of reality which are wholly yours and yours alone. So any hallucinations that you've ever had, every time you go and have dreams, you are dreaming. Your dreams are yours. Your nightmares are yours. And you can be dreaming those nightmares or those experiences in dreams in public places with people that you know, with loved ones that you know. But that doesn't mean that those are actually your loved ones experiencing the same dream that you're experiencing. And yet, if you are so blessed, you may have experiences where reality changes before your very eyes, and the impossible is made possible, even if only for a few moments. And that is an experience that is afforded to you and you alone in order to communicate something to you. And if you observe yourself and remember yourself, remember your divine mother, and remember that she has the power to shape and mold your path any way necessary in order for you to awaken and self-realize and accomplish your true potential, then you will comprehend the nursery rhyme. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Just meditate on that. Just meditate on that. And you will begin in time and with patience, self-observation and self-remembering. You too will be blessed with moments where the impossible will be made possible, and you will experience something, you will see something that shouldn't be there. And if you ask the person next to you, did you see that? They'll say, see what? And they will not have seen it. And you can sit there asking yourself and brooding over this for hours and days. Was it really there? And they weren't able to see it, and only I was able to see it? Or did I hallucinate it and it was never really there? And the reality is, that's your rational mind, your binary mind, trying to make sense of what it cannot comprehend. How you and your friend and loved one were in the same space, were in the same field, sharing an experience. And a change was made to reality that you needed to see, and they didn't. So they didn't, but you did. Was it really there? Was it not really there? Nothing is there. Nothing is ever there. You see how the question itself, the binary argument, just falls away? Does it exist? Does it not exist? It does and it doesn't. Is it there? Isn't it there? It is and it isn't. It's both, and it's neither. The mind can't wrap its head around this, but you can experience it, and the consciousness can be totally at peace with it. Because that's our experience every moment of every day of our life, if only we awaken to it. Benjamin, Harsha left us what looks like a couple clocks and some boxes with red X's. Okay. And Benjamin Ochoa says, but Harsha is a new name that I also don't recognize, so welcome. Nice to have you here. And Benjamin Ochoa says, having to do with the subject on multiverses, said, this is the beginning of the golden age. Then the other guy, head of AI, said, we're going to accomplish unimaginable things in the future. Having to do with the subject on multiverses. This is the beginning of the, this is, okay, from the point of view of the materialists, from the point of view of the Black Lodge, this is the beginning of the end of the Kali Yuga. This is for them their golden age. And it is also the beginning of the golden age in a strange way. But that's because of the overlap and the metamorphosis of what's taking place. How the humanity, the seeds for the golden age, will be born of this time of great confusion and great ignorance and great darkness. And that's where we're going to accomplish unimaginable things in the future, the AI guy said. We're going to accomplish unimaginable things in the future because AI has no imagination. It's incapable of imagination. It can hallucinate, but it can't imagine. Imagination is a quality of consciousness, which AI cannot in and of itself create, but it can possess. And that's the key. That's the key. That's why the end game for them is transhumanism. Transhumanism. That's why they want to put chips in our head and connect us 24/7 to the cloud so that the AI can have access to our consciousness. That's the Black Lodge's end game, right? To enslave humanity fully and completely. That's its end game. Okay, so we talked about multiverses, we talked about the Mandela Effect, we talked about perception and consciousness creating the reality, which is an illusion anyway. Certainly the three-dimensional reality is. But there's one more M word that I didn't put in the title because it would have made the title too long. And that M word is manifestation. And manifestation relates to this topic of multiverse and Mandela effect and manifestation. They all, it's funny, but they're all start with M, which is mem, which is the waters, the primordial waters. It's the Akash, right? It's that which, it's the stuff of the universe, right? It's the primordial soup that is vibrated into existence. In the book of Genesis, so the spirit hovered over the surface of the waters, of the surface of the deep, and the waters comprehended it not. So manifestation, as you know, is this very popular practice among the New Age and the self-help community in order to create that which you envision, that which you imagine, that which you want. You visualize and you invest yourself heavily into your vision, and you manifest it. What does this have to do with multiverses and Mandela effect? Well, as I explained, there is only the great multiplicity, the great omniverse of an infinite number of individuated experiences. But it's still a shared universe. It's a shared space. It's a one. That's why the great law of karma is so important, of cause and effect, because the great balance must be upheld. And that law of karma is managed consciously. It's not a mechanical law. We do as Einstein said, God does not play dice with the universe. Well, the universe is not some kind of giant pinball machine. To the materialist scientists, it is that, because they look at three-dimensional reality and they look at the laws of physics, and they look, they look at astronomy and the movements of the planets in the heavens, and they can reduce it all down to mathematical equations and gravitational field. They could reduce it all down to Newtonian physics by and large. So they think that it's all one giant machine. But again, they're looking at an illusion. Three-dimensional reality is just line items of code on a virtual reality that exists in consciousness, in the space in the mind space. So it is therefore possible to affect changes to that, quote, reality, to manifest. However, if what we are manifesting was born of mechanical nature, was born of our ego, in other words, if what we are manifesting are our desires, they are by definition subjective. And by manifesting those desires, we are throwing off the balance. And we are taking the creative power of God, our individuated essence of that power of selflessness, and applying it to selfishness. Now, many people in the self-help community and many people who have amassed great fortunes are also great philanthropists, so-called. And in a very cynical way, even secular writers and commentators have pointed out that many wealthy people and many members of the elite strata of humanity give away huge sums of money in a desperate attempt to clear their conscience. And even secular commentators have pointed that out. And you can call that a very cynical point of view, and that's fine. Or you can say that even the very well-intentioned ones, the ones who always wanted to make a world a better place and have been using manifestation with the best of intentions, they end up giving huge sums of money away because they somehow know deep down that they have to make amends, that they have to put some balance back into the system. And, whether you want to call that buying your way into heaven or clearing your conscience, or there's so many different ways that you can interpret that. The most cynical way you can interpret that is, well, these people are just, paying money to these nonprofit organizations because they want to deduct it from their income tax. Well, that's, you can look at it from that way as well. So, but the reality is that we live in a world where manifesting your desires is propped up as a feature of self-actualization. In the same way that same group, that new age self-help, high-performing group, prop up, self-hypnosis, and cognitive behavioral therapy, and they prop up rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic as the key to success in life, the key to self-actualization, the key to self-fulfillment, the key to peace, happiness, and joy. And on some level, these people have to know that they're still on the Titanic. Even if they do rearrange all the deck chairs and get everything nice and neat and orderly, and even if they do, go down to third class and invite up 100 or 200 people from third class to come to the deck and enjoy first class champagne and hors d'oeuvres with everybody, and right, like they still have to know they're on the Titanic on some level, and it's that level of acknowledging their own mortality, and that their entire life they've been propping themselves up, the mortal vessel, right, the mortal vehicle, and they've been rearranging the deck chairs on the vessel, knowing full well that it is destined to hit the iceberg and sink. It is in the face of that mortality that they realize, oh shit, I better give it all away, or I better do something good with it, and I better do a lot of good with it, because I'm going bye-bye. And all this self-esteem and cognitive behavioral therapy and all this, propping myself up, that I'm this and I'm that and I'm so good and I'm so smart and I'm so successful and I'm at the peak of my performance and I'm at the peak of my vocation, and that I've been focused on the wrong thing. Self-help instead of self-serve. Now, I know that when you go to a store or you go to a fast food place, right, self-serve means you serve yourself. Okay. And you can go to a buffet and serve yourself, and you're stuffing your face. Okay. That's not exactly the self-serve that we're talking about here. You serve your higher self. Okay. It's Frodo in service of, it's Sam who is in service of Frodo in Lord of the Rings. And Sam says to Frodo, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. That's what a servant does. A servant waits patiently. A servant is humble. But a servant serves willingly. A servant is not a slave. The servant is not subject. But when you self-help, right? You help yourself, right? That's like, oh, help yourself. Eat all you want. Take as much as you want for yourself, right? Yeah, help yourself. Have another helping, right? We have these words that, that's self-help. That's the key there. Prop yourself up. That's if Frodo is tempted by the ring. If Sam would be tempted by the ring and take the ring for himself, well, you know what? We have a character in Lord of the Rings who is just that. That's Gollum. That's Smeagol. Because Smeagol swears to serve the master of the precious. Smeagol swears on the precious to serve Frodo, to serve the master of the precious. But we all know that Smeagol is not in the business of serving Frodo. And we all know that Smeagol is subject to the ill will of Gollum. Smeagol is enslaved by the precious. Smeagol wants to help himself to the precious. That's Gollum. So manifesting your desires and helping yourself and just taking and accumulating and amassing and self-aggrandizement and becoming a famous and popular and having millions of followers and billions of dollars and God only knows what else, right? It's almost inevitable that anyone with any ounce of conscience, with any ounce of consciousness and ethics and morality, as they age, as they get older, and they begin to feel their own mortality and they see the iceberg in the distance, and they realize, oh shit, what was it all for? What was it all for? And the millions of people, if I'm a self-help guru or I'm a new age guru and I was teaching cognitive behavioral therapy, self-hypnosis, or manifesting your desires or whatever, and I helped millions of people accumulate masses of wealth, what good is any of that going to do any of them as this humanity inches towards the iceberg? And so they start giving it away. A desperate attempt to do right by a life that they focused on the wrong self, a life that they devoted and dedicated to their false self. And they used and appropriated the creative power and ability and potential of their higher self, and they funneled it, right? And they misappropriated and they channeled it into materialism and mystic pride and self-aggrandizement and self-help, whereas they should have been helping their self. Instead of helping themselves, they should have been serving their self. But there's still an opportunity for them to do so. Because Yang Sheng asks, is there authentic steps to achieve self-realization? Yes. Those authentic steps, we call them psychological death. Death of the egos. In the same way that these wealthy elites, once they see the iceberg coming once they feel their mortality, their physical death over the horizon, maybe decades or years away or decades away, whatever, but they feel that sting for the first time, and they realize it's all going to go away. What I've accomplished. So what have I accomplished, really? They have a chance to let go and to turn 180 degrees, turn within themselves, and truly surrender and abandon to the work of their higher self, and let go of their personality, their desires, their wants, their worries, their fears, and to view that shadow self, that false self, and undertake the work to comprehend and to eliminate all that keeps them from being who they truly are. So I call that the Alm of Life, or the Alm of Psychology, but Master Samael called it revolutionary psychology. It's self-observation, self-remembering, meditation, retrospection, comprehension, and white tantra, and elimination of egos. It's all part of one process, and that's in that spiral process that goes around and around and around and around, and takes us up and down Jacob's ladder. Benjamin Ochoa says, lies are quick, but truth moves as slow as an iceberg, pun intended. And he also says, truth is going to hit us in the face. This is why apocalypse and revelation mean the same thing. It means the great unveiling, right? You lift the curtain, and the darker things get, when that curtain is finally lifted and people see the light, it will be like going from complete darkness into a rock concert, when they flash all those bright lights all at once in your face, or like a spotlight, like a World War II searchlight being blasted into your eyes after you just woke up. That's why we have that expression, blinded by the light. And why in the book of Revelations you have the line that talks about the wailing and the gnashing of teeth. Because the darker it gets and the deeper into darkness humanity sinks and allows itself to devolve, the more subjected they are to the desires of their egos, their demons. Well, the demons cannot. The demons abhor the light. They cannot stand the light. That's where the whole thing about vampires not liking sunlight comes from. And in Lord of the Rings, why the hordes of Mordor send out dark clouds ahead of them, because they prefer to fight in darkness. They prefer the shadows. So when Benjamin says the truth is going to hit us in the face, yeah, it's going to hit us like we're going to be blinded by the light, and many people are not going to like it. They won't be able to stand it, and they won't stand for it, and they will reject it outright. And we have to be prepared for that, because those who follow the light, if we are in a small enough minority, and the majority who can't stand the light decides to also not stand us and not stand for us and what we represent, then we will find ourselves being persecuted again, like we have many times in the past. Many times. The seekers of truth and the keepers of truth have found themselves burned at the stake as heretics and as witches and as all manner of, because they project onto us the very things that are enslaving them. So we have to be prepared for that. Yang Sheng says, have you ever anyway, so I'm sure he's finishing that thought as we speak. And he asks, have you ever confronted with black magicians in the astral? Can you talk about that? I have fought with demons in the astral plane, and I speak about those experiences extensively in my book. You can also read about them. Give me one moment here. So if I can do this, I'll do this. Okay. This is on my blog. And here is the link. And that link is also in the chat. Somewhere here. This, yeah, okay. So I talk about life with the demon. And this is a depiction I found that, because a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? One of the times that I grappled with the demon in the astral plane, this is kind of what he looked like. And just, if you can imagine me tucked under his arm, completely paralyzed. And then the second time I encountered him, this is what he looked like. He looked like a voodoo witch doctor, but a skull with googly eyes. And so again, these are just images that I found that were a reasonable facsimile of what I experienced. But if you want to read more about it, then yeah. So I write about it in this article, Face Your Fears, Many Faces. Benjamin Ochoa says, F, that sucks. Well, certainly it was not, it wasn't a pleasant experience. I won't kid you, but it was an important experience for me to have. I had to know what I was dealing with. And how else was I going to know what I was dealing with? And how was I going to be able to overcome it if I didn't know what I was dealing with? And Leia de Tanakur, hello Leia, says, I relate. Benjamin says, yeah, the horror. The horror, but it's something very interesting because my demon is fear. Okay, so the article is Face Your Fears, Many Faces. The interesting thing about being kidnapped in the astral plane by the demon of fear, and this is your fear. Imagine it's your fear has you under its arm and you are paralyzed by it, which means you are in the grips of fear already, literally in the grips of fear, which means, but that demon is outside of you. and he's got you under his arm and you can't move. So you're paralyzed with fear, but you're strangely not afraid. You see the genius of it, the beauty of it, is that if I'm here talking to you right now, if I was to be gripped by fear, I might have a panic attack. I might start stuttering and just freaking out. I might have a seizure, which some of you have experienced. Some of you have seen me have a seizure. That's me being gripped by my demon. That's me being possessed and me being in the grip of fear when I have a seizure. But you see, so I can't, but it's so debilitating when the fear is inside of you and gripping you, grabbing you, possessing you, taking control of you from within. It's a very different experience, and you are very limited in what you can see and what you can perceive. But if you can imagine having that same demon grip you from outside, well, you're still frozen, you're still paralyzed by fear, but now it's outside of you. So you have this benefit of this clarity, of this being, and you can perceive it as it really is, because it's not hiding inside of you anymore. It's outside of you. Now, ironically, it's all inside of you anyway, because the astral plane is inside of us. But this is where the mind gets all screwed up. What do you mean it's outside of you, but it's inside of you? Well, when you dream, where are you dreaming? Yes, you're outside of your body, but is it really out there somewhere? No, it's inside. It's in the internal worlds. But you're outside of your body. You're not in your body. You're not in your physical body anymore. So this is again, it's difficult. It's convoluted. That's why I try to explain it the way I do in these articles and in my book with the visuals and everything else, to try to help you, again, visualize it and imagine it. Use your imagination. And it's, in a very crude way, it's like in the movie Alien, right? When the face hugger was on John Hurt and it was planting an embryo in his chest, right? He didn't know that he was possessed by a parasite. It's only when it burst out of his chest that ended up killing him, true, but the crew knew what they were really dealing with, because now it was outside, right? And now that gives, for those of us and all of us who are conditioned to this three-dimensional reality, and we are so conditioned to understanding and knowing our reality out there, that's how beneficial and practical and meaningful experiences on the astral plane can be, because it affords us the opportunity to interact with our demon, let's say, any number of demons, any number of egos, in that way, and we see them for what they really are. Yang Shang says, thank you for the link. Are you practicing conjurations? Oh, like the conjuration of the 7 and the conjuration of the 4. And yeah, those are prayers that most Gnostics should practice regularly anyway. But it depends on what you mean by conjurations. So, no, I'm not conjuring. To conjure demons means to dispel them. It depends on your understanding of the meaning of the word, because no, I don't invoke, if that's what you mean. But anyway, you'll clarify that for me if you want to. Okay, so I should try to bring this all back together again. Reality is co-created in each and every moment by each and every one of us. The reality that we experience. That doesn't mean that all experience is wholly subjective, nor does it mean that we live in a multiverse where each and every one of us has a universe that is uniquely our own. Nor does it mean that there are multiple copies of us living in multiple copies of this universe, because all of that, again, is born of the rational mind's attempts to comprehend something that is incomprehensible to it. The multiple experiences in consciousness of reality are all part of the great multiple unity. So is there a multiverse or isn't there? There is and there isn't. There is the omniverse, which has room within it for an infinite number of subjective experiences of itself. And as individual consciousness essences awaken in consciousness and become less subjective, they begin to open up and see more objectively the true nature of reality and the true nature of themselves. And begin to know objectively the ultimate nature of the one whole united multiplicity, which is selflessness, the essence of selflessness. And how all of that and none of that is contradictory in any way, shape, or form, nor does it have to subject itself to the materialist perceptions of subjective rational mind in an illusory 3D reality based on quantum experiments, quantum physics experiments. Right? All of that is contained within the overarching singular unified consciousness that experiences itself as an infinite number of essences, of individuated essences. And again, I use your body in microcosm as an illustration of that fact. That you are one being, you are one person with a near infinite number of individuated cells that all have their own individuated existences and their own purposes and functions and their own individual experiences of that one whole beingness that you call yourself. And each one of those individuated cellular experiences are very different from the experience that you have as the individuated whole. So something very similar is happening on the level of the universe, but you have to add in planets and solar systems and galaxies and all the rest of it. If you really want to, and then you have, so this notion of a multiplicity and individuation, but there's also collectives of individuation. And we know that as well, because we experience that in microcosm as well, because we all have families or groups of friends, communities, And then beyond that, we also, it goes up. We have nations, we have creeds and cultures, and so on and so forth, right? That we feel affinity towards, and so on. Then we have our soul family. It goes like, the voluptuousness of it all, the richness of it all, the depth of it all is so profound and comprehensive that it's really so far beyond the capacity of the rational mind that the rational mind has no choice but to think of it like the multiverse, like frames in a film strip, where each frame in that movie that's going through the projector at 24 frames per second, well, each frame is slightly different from the previous. It's the only way that the mind can conceive of, rationalize, and make sense of the nature of reality. And that's why our illusory reality that we project, called film or animation, works 24 frames per second, where each individual still photo is slightly different from the previous one. And that it's only natural that quantum mechanics, quantum physics would postulate and theorize a reality that sort of is analogous to that, where there's multiple still frames of reality, and that at any given moment, any one of them can slide in and out of the projector to produce the experience, the reality that we experience. Yang Sheng said, sorry, I mean, did you use the conjuration of the 4 or the 7? Yes. And did you use any of these conjurations to get rid of demons? No, you can't do that. That's not what they're for. They're prayers. They're useful. They're prayers of protection, and they're prayers to help negative. Can you guys still hear me? StreamYard said that my microphone was unplugged. I'm looking for... So I'm looking here. Let me type this. Oh, okay. So Benjamin says you get okay. No, but my voice has changed, right? Like, I sound different now, right? I don't know what the problem is, if it's StreamYards or if it's Windows, but this happened. This is the same thing happened 3 minutes before I was supposed to start the yeah, this is a problem with StreamYards. It just arbitrarily decides to no longer register this microphone that I use, right? And it says so now I'm using the microphone on my camera. So listen, we're already close to 3 hours. So I think we covered most of the topic. I apologize for the technical problem. I don't know. I'm going to see if there's something I can do about it for next time, although I don't know if there is. Unfortunately, it's just one of these situations where... Anyway, well, if you can hear me now, oh, It might be the universe is telling us we should end the live stream here. We're getting on to 3 hours anyway. So, but before we go, I always give you an opportunity to ask questions, and if you have any other questions to ask, I'll be more than happy to answer them. And I do want to go back to what Young Shang asked here about using the conjurations of the 4 and the conjurations of the 7s to get rid of demons. Yeah, those are prayers of protection. They are not prayers of exorcism, right? You cannot perform a self-exorcism on yourself using prayers like that. So if you have an ego, fear, lust, greed, whatever, right? You can pray for assistance in and protection from them, but that's not going to get rid of them. So you can use the conjurations of the 4 and 7, pray to your divine mother and your innermost to help protect you, but it's frankly you really just have to do the work. You have to comprehend and do the work of transmutation and suffer through what you need to suffer through before such demons can get rid of. Like, we're not talking about getting rid of rats or cockroaches or termites here. This is something that relates to your level of being. It relates to your karma. And it is we have to remember what Sam says. Okay? He says, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. The weight, the burden that we carry is that. The weight of a servant, the weight of a vehicle, the beast of burden. But it's not our choice. It's not our decision when or if we can be free of our egos. We have to participate willingly and cooperate in the process. But karma is karma, and what needs to be paid must be paid, and what needs to be comprehended must be comprehended. And so we have to serve our innermost being. Benjamin Raphael says, could noticing the Mandela effect be a subtle distraction that pulls our consciousness away from the present moment? Yeah, it could be. I can see that. And, the fact that much of this Mandela effect seems to focus on very frivolous sorts of phenomenon, like Fruit Loops and Jif peanut butter. Like, it's like corporate brands and logos and stuff. Like, it really does seem like it's the mind is taking advantage of either a change that was made or just a false perception that we had. And the mind loves to obsess over minutia. I mean, I'm sure you've noticed that. Now, this is not true for everybody, because not everybody has that kind of a personality. But even with women who are, let's say, or men who are more emotional, even they will obsess over like the little things. There's an expression, the devil is in the details. And the mind has this tendency to want to grasp onto something like inconsequential, like some little minutia, some little detail, and just harp on it and obsess over and not be able to let it go. And it's very strange, but it's like a dog or a cat playing with its favorite toy, and it just won't let it go. So to me, things like Mandela Effect and the flat earthers, and there's a number of these phenomenon where it just becomes, as you say, Benjamin, a kind of distraction or a kind of Benjamin replies, he says, exactly. Discussions about corporate brands, logos, and their Mandela effects aren't grounded in objectivity. They're more about the mind fixating on minor details. Thanks for sharing your insights. Yeah, so I mean, but there are other examples of this. So if you have ever been in a relationship with a very a kind of narcissistic and paranoid, envious partner, and you glance a certain way, or you smile at someone, or you talk to someone at a party or something, and that partner, your partner, comes over and says, "What were you talking to them about? Why were you smiling at them? Why were you flirting with them? I saw you from across the room. I saw you flirting with them," and you were like, I wasn't flirting. I was just being polite. I was being, we're at a social event. I was being polite. I was talking to this individual. I wasn't flirting. But then in your partner's mind, if they're envious in that moment, they're gripped by envy. And they won't let it go. They can't let it go. And they can harp on it for days or weeks or even years. And then they'll bring it up as a weapon to use against you and stuff like that. That's the same type of phenomenon as the mind grabbing onto these little inconsequential details and blowing them up, right? We call it making mountains out of molehills. That's the old cliche. So yeah, it's a real tendency of the mind to want to do that. Nat Abraham says, great hairpiece. I think perhaps you put your comment in the wrong chat. I've never been accused of having a hairpiece before. I'm bald. What are you talking about? I'm going bald. I don't have a hairpiece. Anyway, welcome, Nada Brahma. Sorry, Nada Brahma. Welcome. It's a name I don't recognize, so nice to have you here, and thanks for, I guess, thanks for the compliment. I don't know how to take that one. Benjamin Raphael says, maybe he was talking about the Taurus field on your background as a hairpiece. Oh, now there you go. See, okay, see, it's perception is reality. There you go. There you go. That's less of a hairpiece. It's more of a fountain. Does anybody else have any comments or questions or anything else you want to address before we call it a day? Yeah, I guess it is a... I guess that makes me look like... what's that character's name? Sideshow Bob or Sideshow Mel. Anyway, one of the Sideshow characters from Simpsons, right? He was the one that had crazy hair all the time. So... I'll give you a minute to type if you have any more comments or questions, but then we'll call it a day. I do apologize for the technical sound issue. Again, it's StreamYards. I don't know why it does this. Everything will be working fine, and then all of a sudden, boom, it just disconnects the microphone. But the microphone is not disconnected. Windows recognizes it. there should be no reason why it just suddenly stops working. But hey, that's Murphy's law of technology, right? If something can go wrong, it will, and usually does. So there you go. So everyone, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for joining me today. I hope that you all have a wonderful week. Leah says, blessings, everyone. Thank you always, Attlas. Thank you, Leah, for being here. And thank you all for being here. Have a great week. I hope you have a good week, and I look forward to seeing everyone next week as well. Benjamin says, thank you, sir. You're welcome, Benjamin. So if that's all, I want to wish you all a great week. Look forward to seeing you all again next week. And until then, as always, inferential peace. And take care, everyone.